Well, hello, friends. Father Frank Pavone here, National Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to our program. Today, I am so pleased, so happy to be joined by a very special woman. She's a medical doctor from South Dakota. Her name is Dr. Patti Giebink, and she is one of those that, and many of whom we have been privileged to know and to serve over the years, one of those who has spent some time working in the abortion industry and has found her way out and has left that business of doing abortions and has discovered the joy of the Lord in saying yes to life. I want to welcome Dr. Patti Giebink with us today. And Patti, how are you?
I'm very well. Very well. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for everything. And by that, I mean just being faithful to the Lord, letting him lead you on a very, very difficult journey, a very meaningful journey. And thank you also for witnessing to it, because there are many people who get involved in the abortion industry to one extent or another and then do leave for various reasons. And they never talk about it at all after that. But you have chosen to share your story publicly, and that's why, as we're sitting together here today, we are able to talk with you. And I know that it helps many, many people, as you know too, to hear stories like this. So tell us, let's go back and tell us just a little bit more about yourself and your background and how you got into medicine. I know you come from basically a medical family. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, I didn't really plan on being a doctor. In fact, I got into teaching and coaching. Then I got a master's degree and started working in exercise physiology, actually in California, in San Francisco. And I was working with a couple of medical doctors, and I thought, well, maybe I should just go get a PhD in exercise physiology and, keep moving up. And when I called my dad and I said, Dad, I think I'm going back to school. And I said for a PhD in exercise physiology, and he, being a very practical guy, he said, what's that going to get you? And I said, oh, good question. I don't know. And he said, well, why don't you go to medical school? And he'd said that before, and I thought you had to be brilliant, but I realized that you have to, be smart enough, but it's really working hard and applying yourself. So I said, okay. So I came back to South Dakota, did the prerequisites for medical, finished the prerequisites for medical school and applied and got in. And when I first, I thought I'd go into maybe fitness, health, ortho, sports medicine, but I got interested in women's health because that was about the time that there was a lot of emphasis on women's health. And as I did my rotations, I really liked OBGYN. I like how it's got a lot of diversity. You're doing some clinic, you're doing some surgery, you're delivering babies, which is just unbelievably awesome. And so I went that route. When people say, why did I start doing abortions? Well, I ended up at Indiana University, Indiana University Med Center in Indianapolis. I really wasn't looking to go to a program that taught abortions because we really didn't talk about that in medical school and whatnot. But my mom and my sister were good friends with Dr. Buck Williams, who was the lone abortion provider in South Dakota. And I think he was part of the reason that I got in Indiana, which has a very strong program teaching abortions. And so I went down that route. But when I finished residency and came back to South Dakota, I worked in OBGYN. I had my own practice for a number of years. And then I was approached by Planned Parenthood to see if I would consider doing abortions one day a week, because Dr. Williams wanted to retire and he was phasing out. And I said, sure. Mm-hmm. So, I could be doing OB and deliveries, and then one day a week I'd go over and do an abortion day at Planned Parenthood. Well,
So,
Oh,
Patty,
sorry.
let me stop you there and ask you this. We have talked, in our Priest for Life ministry, with many doctors who have done abortions. And one of the most interesting things that they explain to us is what their experience was doing their first abortion. Well, for many times it's first witnessing an abortion, being present during one, and then actually doing one for the first time. Do you recall, and can you tell us a little bit about what that was like the very first time that you did an abortion?
I don't remember because in OBGYN, it's the same technique if you have somebody going through a miscarriage. It's the same technique for many procedures in gynecology. So I don't actually really remember the first one. I know that we worked in a place in the hospital in Indianapolis called Well Women's Clinic, and that's where we did abortions. I don't remember the first one. I remember the most difficult one I did in that clinic because it was an outpatient clinic. Actually, it was in the county hospital. And I did a set of twins at 17 weeks in the clinic, where we didn't really have IV sedation. And I just said, this is too much. It was hard work.
Tell us about the procedure itself in that particular case. Obviously, the abortion procedure changes depending on the stage of pregnancy. But for our viewers and listeners who really have never heard how an abortion is done, let's take that very memorable case of the twins at 17 weeks. You said it was a lot of work. What does a procedure at that point actually entail, step by step?
Well, it's a lot like a first trimester abortion in that you assess the patient, you always do a pelvic exam, you do dating so you know how far along they are. I knew there were twins. And depending on your exam, you decide how to approach it. In this case, I can't remember if I used laminaria. I suspect I did. So after examining her, then I would put some laminaria in the cervix to open it. Let that work for a few hours, bring her back in, take the laminaria out, and hopefully we've got some natural dilation. Then I do a paracervical block, which is using lidocaine, inject a little lidocaine in the cervix, which helps. It doesn't take away all the pain. There's a lot of cramping when the actual procedure happens, and unless you have IV sedation or general anesthesia, you're going to feel uncomfortable. So then I dilate the cervix. I open the cervix to, I can't remember what size cannula I had, but consistent with the dates. And then usually I start with a suction. I have a suction machine and a plastic straw-like cannula that goes in, and I start with that, getting out as much as I can with that. And then with the 17-weeker, which is different, oftentimes in a first trimester abortion, you can get everything out with the suction.
Mm-hmm.
But as the baby gets bigger, then it involves taking a ring forceps or some type of instrument that you can grasp tissue with, grasp body parts. And of course, when you have twins, you have to make sure that you have double the number of parts. And usually the most difficult is the head. And I remember in this case, I had gotten everything out but one of the calivarium, which is the bony head. And I really had to work hard to get the second head out. And I just thought, without general anesthesia or IV sedation, that was a bit much for the patient. So that was memorable.
Dr. Patti, yeah, thank you for describing that. People are just horrified. It's one thing to talk about abortion in the abstract, but one of the reasons I've so appreciated over the years speaking with people like you, is that it's no longer an abstraction. It is the, how do we remove the head? How do we remove the arms and the legs? And I mean, basically, this is a dismemberment of a child, right? I mean, you're pulling off the limbs, limb by limb. Now, you described in your book one of the other instances, and this was in regard to at the time that Dr. Martin Haskell was making the partial birth abortion procedure well known, the mid-90s, as you know. You mentioned, by the way, that you spoke to him. I did also. I got him on the phone one day and was asking him about the procedure. And I basically said to him, look, this is public. I'm talking about it all the time. It's in the news. I want to make sure that when I talk about it, I'm talking accurately. And he actually took the time to chat on the phone about that particular procedure. But you had a section in your book where you mentioned an experience you had that sort of intersected with that partial birth abortion procedure. Tell us about that.
I think you're thinking of I think it was a 22-week or 22-week inevitable delivery. I was a resident and I was an intern or a second year, and more senior people had decided this was a non-viable baby and therefore then sent me in to do this delivery. It's another one of those things that I will never forget, because at that gestation, the head is really big proportionately. And almost always the babies are bottom down or feet down. And so in this case, I think, I can't remember if it was footling or bottom, but anyway, so the legs and the bottom and the thorax came out and the head got stuck. And I almost cry when I think about this because, the baby was alive, kicking, squirming, and the cervix wasn't completely dilated. And because it was considered non-viable, then I really didn't want to do anything drastic that would destroy the woman's cervix or, cut, it's called Durson's incisions, to get the head out. And this is pre Haskell, So eventually the baby died and eventually the head came out, and it just took a long time, and it was just kind of brutal.
Yes.
For me, anybody observing. So when I talked to Haskell, having remembered this, and as he was describing, I knew very well that these 22-weekers, the head always gets stuck. That's why if you decide a baby in the second trimester is viable, almost always we do a C-section, because unless it's head down and it's not going to change, the head gets stuck. So you do a C-section if you have a preterm breech, especially that young, because the head always gets stuck. So I'm talking to Dr. Haskell, and he's describing this procedure where you deliver the body, the legs, the body, and you get up to the head, and you basically kind of turn the baby over so it's face down, and then you can slide a little scissors in and kind of open up the spinal canal in the back of the head, which is very thin there, so it doesn't take much. And then the cerebrospinal fluid drains out and the head decompresses and the baby comes out.
Wow. It's, let's talk about how the Lord worked on you. I want to read a quote here, because this again is something that we see in the stories of so many of those who, like you, after having done these procedures, came to a point of rejecting it and becoming pro-life. You talked about your interaction with people who were pro-life, and here's what you said at a certain point in your book. You said, instead of condemnation, the judgment I expected, All I received from these people was overpowering love. You know who said the same thing? Dr. Bernard Nathanson, whom I was privileged to know as he made his journey out of the abortion industry. Tell us more about this. What were the encounters, the loving encounters with pro-life people that helped you then make a journey closer to the Lord?
As I mentioned, the Alpha Center and Leslie and Alan Unruh were really instrumental in that. And I really wasn't planning on coming out and talking about being pro-life. I kind of was under the radar. It took 10 years from working at Planned Parenthood until, I mean, that's a long journey. And I really wasn't, it was not intentional. But in 2001, I started going to a small church, and it was sort of serendipitous how I happened to even go to this church. Somebody just mentioned it, and I didn't know anybody in the church. I'd never heard of this denomination or anything, and I just showed up. And, you know, I was just captivated. I couldn't not go. And it wasn't that I set out to change my views, because it took a long time, even after I started going to that church, before I kind of realized that my views had shifted. So I started going to this small church in Chamberlain, in South Dakota. And I mean, God just spoke to me, and I had a hunger and to read the Bible. And actually, I started understanding the Bible, and the pastor was a young pastor, and he had a class for several of us new believers. And I just started reading the Bible. And then another new believer and I started doing a phone Bible study. And we did that for almost 2 years. And as I read the Bible, you know, the character of God comes through. I spoke in the book about how when I was doing abortions, and I thought, well, it must be okay because there's this organization of priests and ministers that are, you know, pro-choice, and they say it's okay, so it must be okay because I don't understand the Bible. But as I read the Bible over time, I mean, you can't read the Bible and understand it and not recognize that God is a God of life. And so as I came to that realization, I started working with an OBGYN in my small town, Catholic. The 4 years we worked together were probably the most fun of my whole career. But this was right around the time of the first Vote Yes. And every time we went to a meeting, she just was very open about her belief. And I really admired her, because in medical meetings and stuff, that is not the popular view. But working with her, I think it just challenged my beliefs. And so actually in 2006, there was the first Vote Yes for Life legislation that would have banned almost all abortions in South Dakota. And I was approached by a couple people to film a commercial for Vote Yes for Life. And I was real reluctant, because I wasn't really ready to step out there and say anything. And they said, oh, well, you know, we're going to Photoshop in, you'll be in a group of doctors. And, you know, so even though they filmed us individually, they were going to Photoshop us together. Well, that didn't happen. And all of a sudden, I'm the only one in the picture, and I'm saying, you know, I'm Dr. Patti Giebink, and I used to work at Planned Parenthood. Now I'm asking you to vote yes for life. And it was kind of like, I talk about bait and switch, how I show up thinking one thing and then God does something else. And I think because maybe he knows that I'm not that courageous. And if I knew the full ramifications of what I was doing, maybe I wouldn't do it. Maybe I wouldn't do it. But I just figure I'm just going to be obedient. I'm going to show up. And so I showed up for that commercial. Then it ended up just being me. And, you know, God is so great because the commercials came out, and a few days later, I flew to Pakistan for a month. So I missed all the excitement, and by the time I got back, it had pretty much blown over, except for my family that is very much pro-choice and quit speaking to me. And but it that led to a whole bunch of other things that eventually led to where I am now. And I remember meeting Leslie at the Vote Yes for Life campaign office, the first one in 2006. And I was just overwhelmed. I met her, I met Alveda King. It was kind of overwhelming. By 2008, in the second Vote Yes, by then I was on the committee. I was the treasurer, which was kind of funny because my name was on every piece of literature because I was the treasurer. And at the end, we lost in 2006 and we lost in 2008 by about the same percentage. But I was writing an email because everybody was so discouraged. And I said, we won. This is a huge win. Look at what happened. The topic, people were talking about it. And then women who had been hurt by abortion came in for post-abortion counseling, and women started asking, well, what are the risks of abortion? What are the consequences? Maybe I shouldn't just jump into this. So it opened dialogue. People were talking. It was not, a lot of people weren't talking about this before. So I made a list of things, why this was a success and why it was really a win. And God cares about the heart, not so much the tally of the votes. He cares more about the heart, and hearts were changing and lives were changing. And I joked about saying, well, I think I'll write a book. And a couple of people said, yeah, you should do that. So that was, by then it was 2009. So here we are over 10 years later, and I finally get the book written. And part of the reason I wanted to write the book is when people say, well, tell me what changed. And I said, well, that's a long story. It's not 30 seconds. It's a long, long story. So I thought, well, I'm just going to have to write it out. And then I said, the things that God did were so incredible, because I can't take any credit. It's all God. I was very reluctant. I didn't want to switch sides. I wasn't planning on changing sides. I lost pretty much all my friends. Many of my family members quit talking to me. But the upside was I got to meet Leslie and Alan and develop a whole new bunch of friends. And they're just so dear. And they have treated me so nice. It's just every time I need to go to the Alpha Center, if we have I'm now on the board, 10 years on the Alpha Center board. And when we have a meeting, it's just fun. It's fun to see what's happening. And the young women who are working at the Alpha Center, and Leslie's such a great mentor, and they are so caring and compassionate. So I just feel the love. So, which is so much better. I remember on the other side how we were so unhappy.
In listening to you say this, I think I want to relate, and I've read the book. I think it's great. It really does show that this was a long journey and a complicated one. Many different dynamics were happening. Many twists and turns of the journey quite took you by surprise. And yet you were able to look back at this. It's actually good, I think, that so much time passed by before the book got completed, because you can see in reading through it, and I really want to encourage our readers and our listeners to get hold of this book, because they will see you're able to look back at all your experiences and see that whether the ups, the downs, the surprises, uh, God had his hand in all of it, and he was leading you in a very loving way, and he brought many loving people into your life. And I can tell you, I mean, Alvita King, she's part of our team here, and we work with her every day, and she just shows, as does Leslie, and as does Alan, and the people within this movement. They're just reflecting a love that they know that God has for them. And it all reminds me of a moment that I want to share with you and with our listeners here as we conclude. And we hope we can talk with you again in the future, because there's so many other lessons to be learned from your journey that we would want to unpack with you. But I was with Dr. Bernard Nathanson the day that he announced to a group of pro-life people that he was on the brink of conversion. Now, he had already rejected abortion, but he was on the brink of conversion to faith. And he said, after he related the different dimensions of his journey, he said, I just hope that God can forgive me. And you know what I said to him, because I was moderating the session at which he was speaking. And at that moment I said, Mother Teresa, and Patti, you refer to Mother Teresa of Calcutta in your book as well. And I was privileged to know Mother Teresa. She would minister, she would help these sick and dying people on the streets of Calcutta. And, these were not Christians, and they would look at her and see how much she was caring for them. And then they would ask her, Mother Teresa, this Jesus that you believe in, is he like you? And her answer was, no, but I try to be like him. And then I said to Dr. Nathanson, if you have experienced the love, the forgiveness, the compassion from the pro-life people, that's only because we are trying to be like God. We're trying to be like him. And God has already forgiven you, I said to Dr. Nathanson, and the whole group just spontaneously began praying for him at that moment. So I know that you know the Lord's forgiveness, you know the Lord's grace, you bear witness to it in what you're saying and doing and writing in these days. And on behalf of all the pro-life people, I want to thank you for that, assure you again of God's love and of our love, and just to say, the power of testimony is what has brought so many people to God over the centuries. And we thank you for your courage in sharing the testimony of the journey that he has led you on as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
We do look forward to speaking with you again. Maybe we can have a program where we'll get Leslie and Alan and Alvita and you and me, and we'll all talk together. How do you like that idea?
Oh, that would be marvelous. That would be wonderful.
I think we should do that because, as I say, we're all friends, and we all can praise the Lord together as we should all sit down together and just reflect on how wonderful his grace is, how he leads us in surprising but beautiful ways. And again, your book is called Unexpected Choice, and that's a really well-named book for the journey that you describe here. So an abortion doctor's journey to pro-life. We look forward to sharing this with many, many more people. And again, Dr. Patti Giebink, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
I think we have Richard Lee, we have Jim Garlow, and we have Father Frank Pavone. Someplace they were in the audience, so I appreciate you. I appreciate you being here.
Follow him, Father Frank Pavone, Fr. Frank Pavone, on Twitter. He is the National Director of Priests for Life. Please go to priestsforlife.org.